Hello and good evening. On behalf of our patrons, Dipti, Dattaraj, and Ishita Salgaocar, we welcome you to episode 25 of ListenIn. Today is special and very dear to us as we launch our latest book, Souza, the Artist, His Loves and His Times, by eminent author Victor Rangel-Ribeiro, celebrating the genius, life, and times of Francis Newton Souza. We are graced today with the presence of Victor Rangel-Ribeiro, all the way from Princeton, New Jersey, where it is the crack of dawn. Thank you, Victor. It is such an honor. We are all eagerly awaiting to hear your stories. We also have with us our dear friend of our foundation, Conor Macklin, Director, Grosvenor Gallery, joining us from the UK. Among our special guests, we have with us renowned artist and Padma Bhushan Awardee, Laxman Pai, who will be releasing the book. Thank you, Mr. Pai. Such a privilege to have you with us. Today's event begins with a welcome address by our chairman, Dattaraj Salgaocar. We then open to the conversation between Victor Rangel-Ribeiro and Conor Macklin about the book and the life of Souza. This will be followed by the official book release by Mr. Pai. I now invite our chairman, Dattaraj Salgaocar, to begin the welcome address.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's evening session. I'm delighted to have a double celebration today. One is the release of the book and Goa's 60 years of liberation. It is with great pride that we launch a publication and project that has been dear to my heart. Souza, the Artist, His Loves and His Times. A biography written by eminent author and my very good friend, Victor. This book honors and celebrates the genius of Francis Newton Souza. My relationship with Souza has been quite unique, not just because of his Goan origin, but because he was born in Salgaocar, the birth village of my ancestors. Souza's work has always fascinated me, right from the late 70s when I first began learning about Indian art and artists. I'm very excited to have three very dear friends with me today. Victor, who has tirelessly and enthusiastically worked on this book for the last 8 years. Victor, your dedication and attention to detail has been phenomenal. Conor of Grosvenor Gallery, a very dear friend and a friend of Sunaparanta. In fact, he gave a wonderful lecture last month. And last but not the least, Mr. Laxman Pai, thank you very much for being with us today as one of Souza's contemporaries. It is a great honor and it's very special to have you with us. This biography is a tribute to Francis Newton Souza, and I hope this inspires artists both in Goa and all over, both emerging and well-known, to never compromise and to keep challenging us with their idea of beauty and their visions of the world. Thank you all very much and have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Mr. Salgaocar, for those inspiring words. Before we begin our discussion, we would like to introduce our guest. Victor Rangel-Ribeiro is an Indian writer, former journalist, music conductor, and editor. He is most noted as the author of Tivolem, whose writing was funded by a New York Foundation for the Arts Fiction Fellowship, and which was awarded the Milkweed National Fiction Prize and shortlisted for the Crossword Book Award. The author lives in Princeton, New Jersey. Conor Macklin is the director of Grosvenor Gallery in London and is a specialist on the works by Francis Newton Souza. He has organized several exhibitions on the artist, including the recent traveling show, Souza in the 40s, that came to Sunaparanta in December 2018. He also put together a show entitled Souza Picasso in New Delhi in 2011. Laxman Pai is a contemporary Indian artist whose work is influenced by the vocabulary of Indian miniatures, traditional designs, Indian music, and natural landscapes. The artist spent a considerable portion of his career in Paris. He has exhibited at major biennales and exhibitions across the world. His paintings are part of various public and private collections, including the Paris Museum of Modern Art, New York Public Library, Berlin Museum, and the Ben and Abby Gray Foundation in the US. He is a Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan Awardee. I now invite Conor to begin the conversation.
So good evening, everyone, or good morning. I think that what makes this book particularly relevant and particularly interesting is the fact that it's written by Victor. And I was just looking today just to see the parallels, and the clear parallel to me, and which I really want to ask Victor about to get the ball starting, is, and this is what makes this book very unique, would be his insight, because Victor, above all, is a contemporary of Souza. So his account will be unique from this point of view, because he will have the first-hand, the primary information on Souza. So Victor, I see that you were born in 1925. Souza
Right.
was born in 1924.
Yes.
So you're both pretty much the same age. So I want to ask you first two questions, and you can answer them in your own time. But first, I want to ask that: how did you first hear or come to hear of Souza? And then second, how did you then finally meet, and what was your relationship? And then I'll ask another question after that.
The strange thing is that we spent our childhood 2 or 3 years in Salgaocar in houses that were almost back to front, but we never met there. We spent some years in Bombay, we never met there. We met in New York in 1967 because I had settled there, and Souza and Barbara Zinkant fled London in order to escape the lawsuits and things that were there. A cousin of ours, Luis Miranda, got to know Souza first, and he insisted that my wife and I, should drive with him to meet Souza. Later, the significance of this is that later, Luis Miranda became a patron of Souza, a better patron than perhaps Conor and the man from Detroit. It's a move we didn't want at first to make the drive, but I'm so glad that we did, because we met an extraordinary couple, both Souza and his young bride, Barbara Zinkant. That was 1967.
But had you heard of Souza before?
Yes, oh yes, I had. We had been to the first PAG exhibition in 1949, but before that, a man called Nadir Boman Beram, who's a wealthy Parsi, had shown me a portrait by Souza of a young Goan fisherwoman. And that was very, very impressive. I was struck by the power in the painting, but I couldn't meet him then. I met him at...
Can I just ask a little bit more about your background? So you had gone to Bombay at the same time as Souza, I imagine, or?
We went there in 1939. Before that, I was in Goa. But I was in Bombay from 1939 till 1956 when we migrated here. So we spent the war years and the struggle for independence at the same time in Bombay.
And what was the so obviously when that show happened in 1949, were you an active gallery goer? Were you visiting galleries by then, or?
No, I was not that active as a gallery goer because I was busy collecting books.
Okay.
And there was no wall space in the house. We had bookcases everywhere. And at the exhibition, I missed Francis because he had already left. But I got to know Ara very well, and I got to know Raza very well. They became friends. But then they too left, Raza left for France in 1950.
Yeah.
So we lost touch.
So tell us about the show, because obviously the exhibition, he had a previous show, didn't he, which was taken down by the police for obscenity for the male.
Yes, he had 3 previous shows. The first one was in December 1945. He had been expelled by the JJ School of Art, apparently for because he was involved in the independence movement. But that exhibition, it was, when he was expelled, he went home, he told his mother he had been thrown out of school, and he began to paint very furiously. He had about 50 paintings at the 1945 show. That was a success. So he decided to have another show, this time at the New Book Company in 1946, at a place, a hall that they called the Silverfish Club. And then he had another exhibition in 1948.
Is
So he was,
the Silverfish Club still going? No.
that I don't know.
Oh.
I used to go to the bookshop, but not to the Silverfish Club. I think silverfish are the enemies of books.
I think I read somewhere that all these artists used to hang out at that Chetna restaurant, no?
Chetna was a meeting point for artists, yes.
And we obviously, I know that there was other people like Al-Kazi, and he had his theatre, and there were the progressive theatre people, and there was obviously Ram Kumar's brother. He was the writer, and they're all meeting. And so
yes,
you were obviously at the exact same age of all these guys. So
I did not, because my interest at that time, as I said, was
books, yeah,
like books, building my library.
And so, I mean, and so, what other parallels did you get married at the same age as Souza, or?
I got married I don't remember the age at which I was married, but it was 1954, okay. So 29. And so, well, Souza lied about the age at which he got married. What he wrote was that he had his exhibition in 1945, and I got married within about a year. Within a year of December 1945 takes us to December 1946, right? So I began investigating. I looked up the church records, nothing. I looked up 1947, nothing. I looked up newspaper cuttings, nothing. Then I had two researchers helping me, and they figured out Souza kept talking about Maria Figueiredo being a Portuguese girl, Portuguese woman from Margao, which seemed very strange to us. She was a Goan girl from Margao. So they went to the Portuguese consulate in Bombay, and they found out that Souza and Maria Figueiredo were married in the Portuguese consulate in 1948.
Okay.
Even
this is very poignant, isn't it? On this day of Liberation Day.
Exactly.
For both you and Souza, because when Souza left for London, he left on a Portuguese passport.
Yes, he did.
So when you left Bombay, you left also on a Portuguese passport, did you?
No, I did not. In 1947, I got rather upset with Salazar because he refused to talk about the future of Goa. He said, I can't talk about this with you because you don't exist. You're Portuguese. So I stopped speaking Portuguese. I stopped reading and writing in Portuguese. And when we were coming to the United States, Ashok Mehta, who was Nehru's sister's son-in-law, I had to appeal to him to grant me Indian papers. He said, I can't do that. I said, well, you've got to do it. We've got to go to the States. Then he gave me a certificate of identity. I came here without a passport. And when we got to England, that was strange. When we were disembarking, the captain was given orders to send us back to Bombay. But they said, because India is a member of the Commonwealth, we will look the other way and you just walk off the ship, which is a nice compromise.
And just out of interest, how long was that trip? Just because it's fascinating, all these stories. We
by ship from Bombay to London took 2 weeks.
2 weeks, wow.
2 weeks. And then another 6 days to the United States.
Wow. Amazing, isn't it? Well, I mean, I think you have a wonderful story to have lived through, all those great upheavals, and also to have survived this new COVID. So you're doing very, very wonderfully well. So tell us now, why then did you decide to do this the biography? Because let me I'll ask you another question in the same tone. Why did you decide the biography? Because obviously with Souza, you've got to bear in mind that he'd written his own biography, his autobiography, in the words and lines, obviously, which is his own writing. And obviously, I'm sure it would be interesting to hear what your thoughts are on that. And obviously, there was that wonderful book published in 1960 by Edwin Mulland as well, which also has some biographical content. So why did you decide to do a biography, and also talk to us about Souza's words and lines, please?
Okay. When there was not much being written about Souza until he died in 2002. Soon after that, the obituaries began appearing, and I read most of them. I read the one in the Telegraph in London, and by a friend of his, and others that appeared in New York and in Goa, Bombay, but they all had things that I knew were incorrect. So I began reading things that Souza himself had written, and Words and Lines was one of them. Also the book by Mullins, published I think in 1962 in London, that contained mistakes. But these were not mistakes so much as myths that were propagated by Souza himself. He started them. Why did he do this? Shelley says that he spread stories about himself to match whatever feelings of grandeur he felt at that particular moment. For example, he went from Goa to Bombay as a child, okay? According to him, he was almost dying of smallpox when his mother disguised herself and smuggled him into Bombay. Otherwise, he would have been in an infant's grave. To me, that seemed strange. No matter how well a woman disguised herself, I can't see her being able to smuggle a child with smallpox, a baby with smallpox, from Goa to Bombay. It would take too long in those days. If she went by train, it would take 2 days. If she went by bus, it would take 2 days. By car, a day and a half. If she took one of the sailing ships that used to go back and forth in the 1920s, it would take a week. So there was something wrong about that story. So I began checking and couldn't find anything. Finally, I discovered that, there was a photograph of Souza as a 4-year-old with his mother. He's seated on a stool with something in his lap. And I checked his face, absolutely clear, no sign of smallpox. So he couldn't have had smallpox as a child. Impossible. Turned out he had smallpox when he was 4 years old. He was already in Bombay. The other story that was spread was that his mother had prayed to St. Francis Xavier to save him from this death from smallpox. And when he survived, he was then given the name Francis. That's wrong. He was baptized Francisco Newton Souza. And the reason he was baptized, given the name Francisco, was that his father's father was called Francis, Francisco. St. Francis, poor chap, had nothing to do with it. So he's been given a lot of praise for nothing. And one can't take that back. It's already gone to him in heaven.
But do you think that, because obviously, artists today are very different to artists then in the 50s. And in that post-war period, artists were expected to lay their lives on the line as such. You had to be sort of, sort of, you have to had a lot of anguish, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of personal sort of commitment. And obviously, lots of other artists, like Buffet, like even Picasso and all these guys, and Bacon, they were all very conscious of their image.
Yes, they were.
It was part of the parcel. It was deliberate. It was part of an expressive tradition.
You're right.
So,
they cultivated it. They cultivated an image.
Exactly.
And so Souza did that too. But he was very smart in that at that time in India, there was not that much interest in art at all. So he, Raza, Gaitonde, and the others were real pioneers in that they started what amounted to a rebellion, and they shook up the art world, and interest began to grow. The interest in buying began when paintings began to sell at a profit. Before that, people were not that anxious to buy. But Souza was also very smart in that he decided, and he said so, he wrote, every major artist has succeeded because he has had a wife or a mate who went to work and put bread on the table. That left him free to concentrate on his art. And he followed that practice. He married Maria, who had been working for his mother. They went to London. When she arrived there a year after him, she began to work full-time. She worked 2 jobs. She did the sewing in the daytime, and in the evening, she worked at the Conor Hotel, which is one of the major hotels in London, to bring extra money in. And she did this for 5 years, from 1950 till 1955. And what happened? Even though her work enabled him to find success, he abandoned her, abandoned Maria and his daughter, Shelley, and took up with an actress from Czechoslovakia, Liselotte de Kristian. She worked. She bore him 3 daughters. He achieved great success. That was a very productive period in his life. What does he do as a reward for Liselotte? He falls in love with a 16-year-old. Then he goes to Maria and asks her for a divorce so that he can marry Barbara Zinkant. So now a 40-year-old man marries Barbara, who by then is 17 years old. The moment they get married and they come to India for a honeymoon, go back, they are sued for child support by both Maria and Liselotte. He has about 150 paintings that he's afraid that they will seize. So he gives them to Barbara Zinkant as a gift. Then he flies into New York, and Barbara comes by ship with all those paintings, which he then proposes to sell here. So he had a formula that guaranteed success. Find somebody to work, and I will do the painting. But he didn't follow that.
So what happened when he went to America? How were his first years in America?
Not good. He had come to America because he had been promised by Eugene Schuster, a man who had a gallery in Detroit, that he was going to pay him so much in exchange for paintings. So when Souza came, he found a flat, or Barbara found a flat on the west side of New York. The checks from Schuster came late, always. And unfortunately, the first exhibition that was held in Detroit, it was at what was called the London Gallery, I think. Schuster and Barbara drove all the way. It's a good long drive. And when they arrived there, a couple of days after the exhibition opened, Schuster threw a party with many invited guests. But some of the men and women at that party were swingers, which suited Souza, perhaps. But Barbara, at one point in the evening, went looking for him, and she opened a door that had been closed and found Schuster with another woman. The way Barbara described the scene to me in an email, she says, I did a lot of yelling. And the next day we got into the car and we drove back to New York. There were no more exhibitions in Detroit.
So she cut Souza.
Yes, she and Souza remained married till 1974. She went to work and she worked very hard. She was the sole breadwinner there in New York. Souza, both in London and, yeah, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
I'm going to go back just to Schuster quickly. What happened to the Schuster paintings, all those paintings?
I'm not sure, but a trove of paintings was discovered in 2002. And that was put on eBay. I think that part of the Schuster paintings were there in that trove. Schuster's...
I think you're right. I think what happened was the Schuster,
son...
Yeah, I think what I had heard was that Souza was basically, Schuster said, listen, this is the money you owe me for all the expenses and all the stuff and all the advances. So give me paintings in exchange. He took all the paintings and Souza didn't have any money, so he had to abandon all the paintings with Schuster. Schuster's son then tried to sell all the works
on eBay,
failed on eBay, and then they were actually most of them were sold on eBay. You're right, and then the balance was sold after a few years. Yeah, and obviously one of them was The Birth, which still stands as the most expensive painting sold by Souza, made $4 million.
That's right. And at the time of his death, it could have gone for about 2,500 or 3,000.
If that, yeah.
Yeah.
So and then what else have you discovered about his time in America? I mean, obviously, was he because obviously America was pop art, and because he didn't seem to have many exhibitions, did he, in America?
No, he didn't, because he got distracted. Instead of focusing on his art, he became involved in Pauling's, the scientists' theories about health and the importance of vitamins. And then he found a theory by Redmond about human nature. And he took that up very seriously. Redmondism, he wrote a book about Redmondism called The White Flag Revolution.
Yeah.
It would enable men to become greater than themselves, in a sense, supermen. And wrote a book together with a friend of mine, Jag Mohan, the art critic in Bombay, who was my colleague at the National Standard. The two of them wrote this book, and they expected that it would create a huge movement. Nothing happened. Because I think when I read it, it didn't seem to have any basis in fact. It was pseudoscience, but Souza believed in it. In the end, Barbara Zinkant got tired of all this. She took her 4-year-old son by the hand, and she reached the front door before Souza could. That was the end of that marriage. He turned at that point to my cousin Luis Miranda, who was a young doctor, and asked him. Souza knew him. After all, as I said, Luis had introduced us to Souza. So he made a deal, signed a contract with Luis Miranda. Pay me $300 a month as an advance, and I will give you 15% of any paintings that I sell. I think this was an agreement that was made on good faith. I don't think there was any way in which Luis could have found out exactly how many paintings Souza sold or at what price. But he was okay with it. He's a very lovable person. Souza was okay with it. And they went ahead with that deal for several years. Soon after that was signed, Souza went to London, and to our surprise, he was with Maria. Maria bought paints for him, helped him buy paints, canvas, and began painting. She also allowed him to board there, but she charged him for board and lodge. And she also took the precaution. The moment he finished a painting for which she had provided the materials, she put her name on the back, so he couldn't sell it without letting her know. It was fantastic. It worked for him.
She opened a gallery, hadn't she, in Homer Street? Yeah.
She had bought a house with borrowed money, 38A, I think. She named it Arts 38, the Gallery Arts 38, and put on an exhibition for him. Now, this is the funny part of the story. Souza was very happy. They invited Stephen Spender, who had been a positive force in his life because of the publishing his essays. The very first night that the gallery was open, with Souza's paintings in it, there was a knock on the door, and there was a policeman outside with a warrant to shut the exhibition down. Because Souza had had an exclusive contract with a gallery with which you might be slightly familiar, called the Grosvenor. The Grosvenor Gallery was run by a man called Eric Esterick. Eric Esterick also had a history with Souza. He had put on, after Souza's contract with Gallery 1 ended, Esterick had given him a contract to exhibit at the Grosvenor. But those exhibitions, though they were on a larger scale, were not successful. I think partly because Souza had made enemies among the art critics, at least one of them, and other factors there. So I'm losing my train of thought. We were talking about the exhibition.
So you're saying that this is the eve of the exhibition at Homer Street?
Yes. Yes, right. It was shut down. The next morning, Maria went to see Esterick, and she somehow managed to sweet talk him into allowing her to reopen the exhibition. One of the theories that she told him that Souza had given her the paintings instead of alimony, because when he had divorced her, she had gotten nothing. So this way, Esterick relented and said, okay, go ahead and have your exhibition. And she did, and some of the paintings were sold.
So, as we're talking about people from London, what about Mr. Kurta? What did you find out about Mr. Kurta?
I don't have any first-hand knowledge of Mr. Kurta. And I've read things about him that were not complimentary, but I don't know. He was a collector. He got involved in a lawsuit over some of the paintings, but that was because they had been stolen from him. I think a couple of paintings by Souza had been in storage in London, and somebody else had got hold of them and offered them for sale. Souza, Kurta found out and blocked that. That's okay. But he did help Souza by buying a lot of his paintings. He also arranged for an exhibition in Dubai. But the paintings that he had there, I don't think they got sold. They moved at all. Or maybe one or two got sold. So Kurta bought the rest.
It's funny how, like, from the 1970s onwards, Souza starts exhibiting a lot more in India and Karachi. So why was that?
I can't explain that. I can't understand why there was only one exhibition in New York in 1998 that both Pachi are put on. Perhaps because Souza was not producing enough. He had also thought that one of the major galleries in New York that had helped Bacon become Bacon would put on an exhibition by him. I don't recall the name of that gallery. Can you prompt me?
Was it Marlborough?
Marlborough, the Marlborough Gallery. He approached Marlborough. They turned him down. Souza, Marlborough had not only sponsored or put on Bacon's paintings, they had paid off his debts. That would have been wonderful for Souza. But they would not even put on a show by him. And that was a big disappointment. Of course, at the same time, Souza was poor, not working, listening to Wagner, doing other things, Redmondism. At one point, he was sitting facing his wife, who was busy getting paint off her fingernails and toenails, when a drop of solvent fell on a Time magazine that she had placed on the floor. And Souza became distracted. He saw that that drop of solvent was dissolving the paint and creating new patterns on Time magazine. So he got struck by an idea, why don't I do this? And he began making what he called chemical alterations and selling them fairly inexpensively. And he was so excited about that, he made a note in his diary, artist with no money, artist with no paint is making paintings, is creating paintings. That's how the creative mind works. So that discovery put him on a new path. And after that, you have the kinds of paintings that he produced, whether they are partly chemical alterations and partly his own paintings. And some of them are rather grotesque, but all of them began to sell.
So from the 1970s, where was Souza then? He was still in New York, was he?
He was in New York till 2002.
But he passed away in Mumbai, no?
He passed away in Mumbai on a trip. He arrived in Mumbai around in the middle of December, I think. He also went to Goa and he painted what he called a Goa portfolio. But I've not found any paintings about Goa during that period. I don't know what the Goa portfolio consisted of. At that time, he was with Srimati Lal.
And before Srimati, he had another partner in Mumbai, no?
In Mumbai, another partner. He had a series of affairs, I think. When I was in Delhi at the gallery that was run by Uma Jain and her son Uday in 2011 or 12, she told me that she was surprised. One year, Souza came to her, she had put on an exhibition, and he said to her, come to say goodbye, I'm flying back to New York on such and such a date. But 3 weeks after that, she heard from somebody that he was still in New Delhi. On his way to the airport, at the airport itself, he met a young woman that he knew who was arriving. And he struck up a conversation with her and he walked back with her and apparently paired up with her instead of catching the plane that he was supposed to catch to New York. So he was that kind of person, very unpredictable, and yet you could predict that kind of behavior if you knew what was driving him.
And what do you think Goa meant for him on Republic Day? What?
A lot. Goa was always on his mind. I think that happens with most Goans. Goa is on my mind a great deal. I write about Goa. Even in my stories, I have Goan characters. And the one thing that Souza and I share in common, I think, is that he was not concerned about caste at all. It meant not much, except that in one case, he does mention that he comes from a particular caste, or his forefathers did.
But I think that was a political thing, wasn't it? He was the whole progressive thing was about no caste, no religion, no secular religion.
The progressive thing
was very left leaning, wasn't it, at that stage?
There was a revolution against established art practice, which was they wanted to break those barriers in terms of what art meant.
But also, I was more referring to just like sort of in Gandhi's dream of India, it was a secular state. It was about multiculturalism, and obviously, if you look at the progressive art group, there was Ara, who was very, very poor from very low caste, and obviously Hussein and Raza were Muslims.
Ara, who, as you say, lived on the streets in Bombay, had not enough to eat.
Yeah.
The most dignified man I have met. He had great dignity about him. Raza was very, not, I wouldn't say modest. I'm looking for a different term to describe him. In some ways, diffident.
Urbane. Urbane is what I like to call Raza.
Mm-hmm. Sorry?
Urbane.
Perhaps Urbane later. When he went to Paris, certainly that helped him a lot. But now also we have a strange story about Raza and Souza. They were very good friends. Raza followed Souza a year later, but he went to Paris instead of London. They both struggled for years, right? For the first 4 years. Raza was not able to sell any of his paintings. Wherever he took them, they were rejected, just like Souza in New York. But when Souza needed money, Raza sent him money. And Souza said that helped him get over 2 months of hardship. And he asked him in a letter, "What can I do to thank you?" That question was answered in a very strange way. A friend of Souza's and Raza's, Krishan Khanna, who's one of the top artists today and has been for a long time, wrote to Raza saying, "You are being kept out of the London market by Souza." And Raza had been struggling to get into the London market and could not do it, and felt maybe this makes sense. So there was a breach between Souza and Raza. One day, some years later, Raza and his wife Janine were walking when Souza saw them. This was in Paris. Souza saw them and began walking towards them, and they turned and ran away. Very strange story.
And do you have any stories about Souza with other artists? Any stories about Souza and the eminent Laxman Pai? Do you have?
I don't remember. There must be some hidden there in the book. But at 95, if I had the book in front of me, I could tell you, look at page 100 or whatever. Yeah. But now.
Because obviously it's fascinating, because obviously to have Laxman Pai again, who was living and working in Paris alongside and with Souza, and had shows with Souza.
Well, Laxman Pai was very smart. First, he wrote to Raza, I think, saying, "Find me a good school in Paris, art school in Paris, and I will come." Then he went to the Alliance Française in Goa and began to study French. That was very smart of him, because when he went to Paris, he was already prepared. Souza didn't know French, didn't bother to learn French. Raza studied French too. Souza went to Italy without knowing Italian. So there were barriers that he could have easily overcome, but he did not. And that didn't help him. Laxman Pai was smart, and he did a lot of work in Paris. He achieved success in Paris.
What do you think is the what do you think will be the legacy of Souza?
It will be a lasting legacy, certainly. He changed the Indian art market, certainly. He changed the way Indian artists think and paint. That was a major contribution to the art world. Most of the people who are collecting his works now are wealthy Indians. Whether this will percolate into the rest of the art world, I'm not sure. But certainly you, Conor, are doing your bit in making this possible.
Well, I think that the funny thing about Souza, and it's not really well known, is that in the 50s he was very well positioned, and he was selling to all the great collectors in London.
In London, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
and obviously, like, for example, the first painting in acrylic ever bought by the Tate was a Souza.
That the Tate did not buy one of his paintings for a long time. They accepted a painting that had been given to them by a patron and his wife. But the man who sold the painting to the Tate was Julian Hartnell, also a friend of mine. Julian Hartnell used to prowl the galleries of London looking for painters who he felt were being unjustly neglected. And he noticed that there were a number of paintings by Souza in all the galleries. And what made him think was that Souza at one time, as you say, had been famous. In the late 1950s, he was certainly a sought-after painter. But these paintings were not moving at all. So Julian began buying these paintings. And then he finally sold one to the Tate for £8,000. And that was a major breakthrough. Another gallery had bought a Souza, but they promptly hid it, and it hasn't been seen since then. Perhaps you can approach them and find out why that has happened.
Well, I think, Victor, I think that I look forward to reading the book, I must say, and I think you've given us some wonderful snippets there. I'm sure there's plenty more to discover. And as again, I reiterate the fact that this is a wonderful opportunity to have a primary sort of a contemporary of Souza's writer's biography. I think that's a wonderful angle, and congratulations, and really hats off to you for having persevered and achieved it. And obviously, I think at age of 95, I think you deserve a round of applause.
I thank you, Conor. Conor, you're accomplishing more than Eric Esterick.
Well, let's see. Let me just quickly say thank you very much, Victor.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Victor and Conor, for such a fascinating and captivating discussion. I think that we would like to now release the book Souza, the artist, and his loves and his times, and we invite Mr. Pai to officially release it.
I am glad to inaugurate this book dedicated to the works of my old friend Francis Souza. I am also glad to celebrate 60 years of Goa's liberation. Viva Goa!
Thank you, Mr. Pai. Just to repeat what Mr. Pai has just said, he said, "I'm very pleased and delighted to launch the book of my dear friend, fellow artist and Goan, Francis Newton Souza. Souza and I knew each other for quite a while in Mumbai and then in Paris. He was a rebel right from the time he was in Mumbai. I've extremely fond memories of the time we spent in Paris, struggling and painting. Those were amongst the best times of my life. I'm really pleased to see that a book on him and his works is being published. Let's ensure that we continue to remember the art and the artist. He is a Goan and Indian treasure." All right, before we end, we have one question from Patricia Pereira Seti, who asked, "I would like to ask Victor how difficult it was to write a book about a marvelous maverick of a man with such a wide swath of connections, countries, and interested stakeholders." Victor?
Well, Patricia, yeah, it was difficult because of the research that was involved, but some of that research was provided by you when we met. You had some stories to tell us about the sessions that you had with Souza, the lunches, dinners, and the paintings that you were able to acquire by him. I think it was, he first met your husband at a dinner thrown by one of the diplomats, Indian diplomats in New York. But you were able to provide me with information about how he behaved in New York, his nocturnal excursions on Broadway in search of casual partners. These were rather different from the ones where he was in London. He wrote about the time in London when he would wander about the streets at night, almost out of his mind, calling out for light, with a longing to kill. The forays in London were of a person who was really disturbed because he was drunk part of the time. Those in New York were a different type of exhibition altogether. This was a different facet that he was showing to you, revealing to you. And it seemed to me, in listening to your stories, that Souza was a man of so many different facets, and which one he was showing at a particular time certainly depended on who he was meeting with at that particular moment. And I'm so glad that you helped me find that.
Thank you. That's actually really incredible and inspiring. And on that note, all of us from Sunaparanta thank you, Victor, Conor, Laxman, for this really inspiring and memorable event. We also thank Bonita Shimre, Celeste Fernandez, Jose Lorenzo, who were closely associated with the book. A special thank you goes out to Eva and Chris for accommodating our test sessions at strange hours of the day. Thank you to Shaista Tapar and her daughter Kiran Tapar for supporting us with Mr. Pai's presence and this new way of communicating. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. And from all of us here at Sunaparanta, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Have a good evening. Thank you.